Hello everyone, this is Ali MK Hindi and we're back for another video this week. So what I'm going to be looking at is the PhD thesis introduction chapter. Actually, it's going to be a series over the next couple of weeks. And the reason I'm doing this is I put out content over PhD thesis over the last 2 weeks and I got a lot of requests to break it down into individual chapters. So this is how a PhD thesis outline generally looks like. I'm going to be focusing on thesis chapters. So that's why I'm starting off with the introduction. And the introduction, in my estimation, is one of the more challenging sections in writing up a thesis. Because if you think of it, everything in the middle, whether it's the literature review as well, methods, results, you've sort of already been doing that throughout the years when you're conducting your PhD. But the introduction, you have to start broad. And in the discussion as well, once you've done your findings and analyzed them, you have to go broad again. So these are where the challenges arise. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. For those of you familiar with my content, you know that I like to use a question approach. So in my estimation, there are 4 key questions that you should answer if you want to have a good PhD thesis introduction chapter. Number 1, when I'm reading your thesis as an examiner, I want to be very clear. I want to know what is the problem. Now, in doing so, you have to start broad. You have to go with the bigger picture. Give me a study background. And a very common pitfall is that people rush this part and dive right into the specific PhD thesis problem they're addressing. No, that's not the case. Take your time, talk very specifically about the topic area in general. So let me give you an example. Let's say I was talking about antibiotic resistance. I would start by defining the different classes of antibiotics, and then I'll talk about what it's used for. Then I'll talk about the problems that might arise, such as antibiotic resistance, and then I'll define what that means or the different definitions out there before going into the specific aspect of antibiotic resistance I'm looking at. And especially in a PhD thesis, you're expected to really talk a lot about the bigger picture because you have the capacity to do that as opposed to a research paper. So don't dive straight into the specifics. So once you've talked about the bigger picture, then you talk about the particular research problem that you're going to address. And then you dive into the aims, objectives, and your research questions. So now that you've covered what is the problem, I then want to know when I'm reading your thesis, why is this problem worth solving? So why have you dedicated 3, 4, or however long years you've dedicated in doing your PhD to solving this problem? And once again, this is a common pitfall people fall into. There's a lot of that it has not been done before. That is not going to cut it for a PhD thesis. And in particular in a thesis, because it's a big document and you have the word count to do it, we're expecting a very strong section or subsection where you're talking about the significance of your research. Why are you doing it? What are the implications if this PhD thesis is done in terms of practical implications, research, and so on. Once you told me why is this problem worth solving, I want to know what is your approach to solving this problem. So this is where you give a brief overview of the method. See how I've highlighted and put in bold brief? So there's an actual methodology section where you're going to talk into great depth. All I need to know right now is very briefly, what is your methodological approach? Is it a mixed methods? Is it a qualitative, quantitative? You might even summarize it in a small figure. That's what I want to know. And then last but not least, what to expect from the upcoming chapter. So now that you told me what is the problem, why it's worth solving, what is your approach, I want to know what to expect when I read the upcoming chapter. So that's what we call the structural outline, where you say, in chapter 2, I'm going to do a literature review to establish the gap. In chapter 3, I'm going to talk about the theoretical framework and the methodologies and so on. So my estimation, if you're able to answer these 4 questions very clearly, then you've got yourself a solid PhD thesis introduction. You have not lost your examiner, you've actually won them over, and that should pave the way for a good PhD thesis. So thank you for your time. That concludes my video. If you enjoyed it, like, comment, repost, and do all the amazing stuff we do in social media. And until next time, peace and love, everyone.